when you're using the dollar to trade, the U.S. government has you in a stranglehold. Look what happened to Russia. Their assets were basically confiscated by the U.S. government. So the thing is when any of these countries trade with each other, do the Chinese really want to accept the Indian rupee? Not really. I mean, it's just a fiat paper currency, and nobody wants to accept the yuan either. So you have to have some type of a numeraire, something that nobody else controls. And that's why, throughout recorded history, gold has always been the best money.
A jump in wholesale prices is already sharpening concerns inside the Federal Reserve. For policymakers, it raises the risk that inflation hasn't been tamed, complicating the debate over whether a rate cut next month makes sense. It also keeps the long-running tension between the Fed and the White House alive. Legendary investor Doug Casey doesn't mince words. He says the Federal Reserve shouldn't even exist because instead of controlling inflation, it actively fuels it. Trump, in his view, doesn't understand economics and keeps pushing for lower rates. That might sound good politically, but Casey argues it would be a disaster. The Fed only has control over short-term rates, and forcing them lower means printing more money. Over time, that new money would drive long-term rates higher, distorting the entire market. His prescription is simple: stop manipulating money altogether and let the market set interest rates. Ultimately, he says, abolish the federal politicians and bureaucrats should not manipulate the value of money for their gain. Bank of America analysts, meanwhile, see another distortion ahead. A possible shift in the Fed's portfolio could lead to nearly $2 trillion in Treasury bill purchases over the next 2 years. That would absorb almost all the Treasury's planned issuance, blurring the distinction between monetary policy and government financing. For Casey, the issue runs deeper. In poorer countries, constant inflation prevents saving, pushes people into debt, and keeps them from ever getting ahead. What the world needs is sound money, which historically has meant gold. And now, with the rise of BRICS nations, more countries are signaling they don't want to depend on the US dollar. The push for alternatives is only getting louder. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
As you know, I don't believe that the Fed should exist. It should be abolished. It's the engine of inflation, actually. So Trump, who has no grip on economics at all, whatever his other vices or virtues may be, he's an economic disaster. He wants to see the government reduce interest rates from, let's say, 6% down to 3%. This is going to be catastrophic. First of all, they can only adjust the short end of the rate. In other words, T-bill kind of rates. And I suppose they can do that. But they can only do that by creating more money. And what's going to wind up happening when he replaces Powell and gets somebody as the chairman of the Fed who will basically take his orders, we'll probably see low rates, short-term rates is what I'm trying to say, go down. Meanwhile, the creation of all this extra money will cause long-term rates to go up. I think this would be a great speculation to go long the one and short the other over the next few years. But what should they do? They should leave it alone. They should attempt to abolish the Fed. That would be the right thing to do. Interest rates should be set by the market, not by bureaucrats or politicians who have their own agendas. Well, I'm not sure what the exact number is, but the Fed has about 5,000 employees or something on that order. These people should be fired so they can go out and do something productive with their lives instead of perpetually damaging the economy. Money is the lifeblood of society. And when you play with the money, you're in effect poisoning the bloodstream of society. Look, in third world countries, where I've spent an awful lot of time, one of the reasons why they're poor is because perpetual inflation discourages savings. That makes it very hard for the average guy to get ahead, because in whatever country you are, you save the national currency. But if the national currency is basically toilet paper, it makes no sense to save. Not only that, but if you can get somebody to lend it to you, you borrow. And that amounts to a mortgage against your future earnings. It makes it hard for the average person to elevate himself because he can't build savings and he's encouraged to take on debt. So the answer to the question is we should have a solid, stable money. And that basically means gold. The inevitable is becoming the imminent at this point, because with the rise of the BRICS, these countries stands for Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and a bunch of other countries, they no longer really want to accept the dollar. The dollar is becoming a hot potato. It's the unsecured liability of the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is manifestly bankrupt. Not only that, everybody ought to be afraid of Trump. Relative to the alternative, which was Kamala Harris, of course, Trump was the better choice because Kamala is actually a communist. I mean, frankly, she's the worst possible choice. So keeping it in context that Trump was much better than the alternative, he's a dangerous guy. He acts in a schizophrenic way. He's unpredictable. He's actually acting like a Caesar, arbitrarily putting on tariffs here, 50%. No, 200% for you. No, 500% for you if you don't do what I say. Putting on sanctions to punish countries and change their internal policies. I think he's really out of control, quite frankly. And I think he's going to get worse. I think it's gone to his head. He's an egomaniac that's turned into a megalomaniac at this point. So, yeah, I'm quite afraid of Trump. The fact that even though he said he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, it's still going on. Why is it going on? Because the U.S. has continued to send the Ukraine money and weapons for the last 6 months. The war would have ended the day after the U.S. government stopped feeding the Ukraine money and weapons at the huge expense to the average American. It's completely insane. So, yeah, I'm afraid of Trump. I really am. I think he's going to get out of control.
Doug Casey puts it bluntly, the U.S. dollar is nothing more than an unsecured liability of a bankrupt government. Washington has already shown its willingness to weaponize the currency by seizing foreign assets, as it did with Russia. That sent a clear message to the rest of the world. If your reserves are in dollars, they're not safe. But here's the catch. These countries don't trust each other's fiat currencies either. That's why they need a neutral standard. For Casey, that standard has always been gold. It's been money for thousands of years, and it still provides the backbone of trust in global trade. Bitcoin is an interesting contender with undeniable advantages, but it's still early in its adoption curve. Gold, in his view, remains the safer and more proven option. The BRICS push for de-dollarization is already underway, and the pace is accelerating. In Q2 2025, central banks purchased 166 tons of gold, a 41% increase from the typical quarterly buying amount. That isn't a coincidence. It's a deliberate signal that the shift away from dollar-dominated reserves is gaining momentum. Each fresh round of gold buying reflects a more profound desire among central banks to hedge against U.S. policy risk and carve out more financial independence. Meanwhile, discussions within BRICS are intensifying about when a shared currency might be implemented. The 2026 timeline is gaining real traction among member nations and their allies. In the meantime, stockpiling gold looks like the bridge, a way to prepare for a world where the dollar no longer sits unchallenged at the center of global trade. Let's get back to the interview.
Iran controls the Persian Gulf, and in particular, the Straits of Hormuz. About a quarter of the world's oil passes through this narrow strait. It's only about 20 miles wide. At some point, if the Iranians are really pushed against the wall, they can close off all the oil that goes out of there from Saudi, from Iraq, from the Omanites, the UAE. It'll go nowhere. Oil prices would immediately shoot to $200 a barrel, and worse than that, oil would not be available. So it's something that's not talked about or acknowledged adequately.
And then the U.S. would step in and...
Well, can they really step in? Because, in Yemen, which is one of the more backward countries in the world, there's a rebel group that are known as the Houthis, Ansar Allah, and they have driven away U.S. warships because missile technology today, even a nothing-nowhere country like Yemen, can keep the United States Navy at bay. So this is a situation which is potentially explosive.
Wow. Yeah.
And the war between Israel and Iran is not over by any means. And it was very foolish on the part of Trump to get involved in a dust-up between two countries on the other side of the world. I mean, we have the Hatfields and the McCoys fighting in the Middle East, and Trump has decided to take sides, rather idiotically, quite frankly. So the best thing the U.S. can do, they say, well, we don't want to be an isolationist country. That's the wrong word. We want to be as a non-interventionist country where we don't stick our nose into other people's business. That's right. But in the meantime, he's been provoking the Russians. And this is very, very dangerous because you back a global nuclear power into a corner, you might get a really unpleasant surprise. And he might do the same thing with the Chinese, acting like a big man, a tough guy, keeping up this ridiculous image that he has. So, I'm afraid of what Trump may do. He's not a stable guy, I don't think. It doesn't seem that way. I think he'd be a great guy to go out and have a beer with, but he shouldn't be trying to rule the world, and that's what he's trying. Trump is a huge fan of professional wrestling, where it's all show and kabuki theater and charade. But professional wrestling is one thing, and playing with nuclear powers is another thing. And is it 5D chess that Trump is playing? No, it's somebody that's acting like a 5-year-old kid playing in a sandbox. So no, it's not 5D chess. It's not even 4D or 3D or 2D chess. It's not at all. It's somebody acting out, doing whatever he thinks is a good idea at the time. He flies by the seat of his pants. That's the opposite of 5D chess.
Would you say there was another time that you experienced that you were as concerned as you are now, Doug?
Well, look, I remember, because I was alive then, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where we really came within a hair's breadth of a nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the U.S. And of course, I remember what it was like in the 1980s when the Soviet Union was in its death throes, and it looked like they might invade across the Fulda Gap and try to conquer Europe. That didn't happen either. But this is a time that it seems to me is as dangerous as those previous two times. All of the leaders of all of the Western countries, I think without exception, are just horrible, degraded people. They're all cucks. They're all socialists. So no, I'm not a fan of absolutely any of them. Starmer in England is running the place into the ground. Macron in France. Whoever that guy in Germany. How do they come up with these
How about
people?
you like Meloni in Italy?
She's the best of the bunch, but she's not making any changes to really improve the situation.
Correct.
So the answer to the question is that Europe is a sinking ship. It really is. And the smart European would jump ship.
And go where though? And go where though, Doug?
Well, I'd suggest Argentina,
right?
Because since the election of Javier Milei, this country is turning around rapidly, and my guess is that within 10 years, it'll once again, because it used to be, one of the most prosperous countries and one of the freest countries on the planet.
Yes, I agree with you, Doug.
So that's a good alternative for Europeans.
The timeline for a BRICS currency release in 2026 has moved from vague talk to concrete initiatives. Following the 17th BRICS summit in Brazil in July 2025, member nations laid the groundwork for what could become the most significant challenge yet to the dollar's dominance. The focus wasn't just political rhetoric, it was technical. They pushed ahead with digital payment infrastructure built across multiple frameworks and worked to optimize local currency settlements between trading partners. Through a series of bilateral agreements, they've already started reducing reliance on the dollar in trade, giving themselves a stronger position going into the the next phase. At the same time, the BRICS bloc has undergone a significant expansion. The addition of new members, now referred to as BRICS 10, has dramatically widened its reach. Together, the group represents 46% of the global population and approximately 37% of the world's GDP, spread across critical sectors ranging from energy to manufacturing. That kind of scale matters. It means that when BRICS leaders talk about bypassing traditional financial systems like SWIFT, it's no longer a distant theory. They now weigh building and enforcing alternatives. The question of when the BRICS currency will be released is no longer a side note. It's a central part of their implementation roadmap. With digital platforms, local settlement mechanisms, and geopolitical clout, the 2026 timeline no longer looks like speculation. It looks like preparation. The following 2 years could determine whether this currency becomes a viable alternative or remains an ambitious experiment. So stay tuned. If you're into real, data-backed takes on the financial system, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the weekly updates. Thank you for the support, and I hope you enjoy the video.